The sun was already setting when Michael and Laura parked the car beside the cabin. The cold mountain wind gave Michael goosebumps as soon as he stepped out of the vehicle, but it was the landscape that took his breath away. The wooden cabin looked like something out of a fairy tale, surrounded by tall pines whose treetops seemed to touch the orange sky. The fresh air, mixed with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, felt like it was clearing his mind. He looked at Laura, who, smiling, was pulling a suitcase from the trunk, clearly enchanted by the place. "It's perfect," she said softly, more to herself than to Michael. David and Emily arrived shortly after, laughing about something Emily had said. They, too, were impressed. "This is exactly the kind of retreat we needed," David commented, as he helped Emily carry their luggage. The cabin, with its simple and rustic architecture, was equipped with everything they might need for the weekend: a fireplace in the living room, sturdy wooden furniture, and a well-equipped kitchen to prepare banquet-worthy meals. A soft rug covered part of the floor, making the place even more welcoming. As soon as they entered, the couple split up to explore. Michael and Laura chose a room on the upper floor, with a large window offering a view of the mountains. The bed, covered by a white comforter, looked inviting, and Michael smiled at the thought of the peaceful nights they would spend there. "I already feel renewed," he said, as Laura opened the window to let the fresh air in. "This place has something special, don't you think?" After settling in, the four gathered in the kitchen to prepare dinner. It was something simple, but made with cooperation and laughter. Emily chopped vegetables while Laura tended the pot on the stove, carefully stirring a sauce. David, who had always been the chef of the group, took on the task of seasoning and grilling the steaks, while Michael set the table with plates and glasses they found in an old cupboard. When dinner was ready, they sat down at the table lit only by the yellowish glow of a lamp and some candles David had lit to set the mood, as he joked. Their conversations flowed naturally, filled with memories of other get-togethers and trips. "Remember the time we got caught in the rain while camping?" Emily asked, laughing out loud. "David forgot to close the tent, and everything got soaked." Michael laughed as he recalled the incident, but he noticed Laura's laughter was even more contagious. She seemed relaxed, completely disconnected from everyday worries. He squeezed her hand under the table, a simple gesture that said a lot. At that moment, he felt that nothing could shake what they had. After dinner, the four headed to the living room, where David lit the fireplace. The flames danced, casting shadows on the wooden walls as warmth filled the room. Michael settled on the couch, Laura beside him, a blanket covering them both. Emily brought a bottle of wine and served everyone, while David put on some soft music. "Have you ever thought about how fast life goes by?" Emily asked suddenly, looking into the fire. "One day, we're in college, planning the future. The next, we're here, married, dealing with responsibilities, trying to keep things in order." The question left the group thoughtful for a moment. "That's why trips like this are so important," Laura replied. "To reconnect with who we are and with the people we love." Michael silently agreed. He knew Laura's words were true. At that instant, he felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. The sound of his friend's laughter, the crackle of wood in the fireplace, and Laura's comforting presence by his side created a scene that felt like it had been pulled right from a dream. They stayed up late, talking about life and what they hoped for in the future. Michael didn't know then that the calm of that night would be brief, and that something would soon change everything he thought about his relationship with Laura. But for now, he enjoyed every second, believing this would be a perfect weekend, full of happy memories to carry with him for a long time. On the second night, the cabin seemed wrapped in a different kind of silence. The mild, cheerful mood of the previous day's laughter and conversation gave way to something denser, something Michael couldn't name but could feel. He watched David open a bottle of wine with a relaxed smile, while Emily adjusted the pillows on the couch. Laura was sitting on the floor, legs crossed, fiddling with her phone and looking distracted. The fireplace flames still danced, but somehow, the warmth they gave off didn't seem to reach their hearts that night. When Emily suggested a toast, everyone raised their glasses. "To friendships that withstand time and routine," she said, in her usually lively voice. But unlike the night before, the toast was followed by a strange silence that no one seemed to know how to fill. That was when Emily, always the most impulsive, dropped the bomb. "Want to hear a crazy idea?" she said, with a smile that looked innocent, yet hinted at something more. They all looked at her, curious. "What if we swapped partners, just for one night?" Michael felt time freeze. He blinked a few times, convinced he hadn't heard correctly. He looked at David, who seemed as uncomfortable as he was. Laura, however, let out a nervous laugh. "You're always full of crazy ideas, Emily," she said, but there was a tone in her voice Michael had never heard before. "I'm not saying we have to take it seriously," Emily continued, now looking directly at Laura. "It's just an experience. Something different, you know? We're all so used to the same things." Michael tried to laugh, but the sound came out dry. "Maybe we should change the subject?" He looked at David, seeking support, but his friend just shrugged, clearly uneasy. "Maybe not everything needs to be so different," Michael added, trying to put an end to the idea. But before he could relax, Laura tilted her head to the side, a gesture he knew well, and said something that made his heart sink. "Well, I don't think it would be that absurd." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael didn't know what shocked him more, Emily's initial suggestion or his wife's unexpected reaction. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice louder than he intended. Laura shrank back a little but didn't respond immediately. He felt his breathing quicken, a mix of anger and disbelief welling up inside his chest. "Michael, calm down," Laura began, but he was already standing up. He looked at David, who seemed as lost as he was, and then at Emily, who now wore a provocative smile. Michael wanted to scream, wanted to demand that everyone explain what was happening, but all he could do was leave the room and hurry upstairs to the bedroom. The wood creaked under his rushed steps, and he heard Laura calling his name, but he didn't answer. In the bedroom, Michael sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process. His mind spun in circles, trying to understand what had just happened. How could Laura, the woman he'd known for years, with whom he'd shared so many things, react that way? He looked at the window, where the moonlight illuminated the distant mountains, but the beauty of that view couldn't ease the knot in his chest. He heard footsteps behind him, and soon felt Laura's presence. "Michael, you're overreacting," she said softly, but to him it sounded like a snap. "Overreacting?" He turned to face her, his eyes full of pain. "Laura, did you really think that was a good idea? Do you have any idea what that means to me? To us?" Laura lowered her gaze, seeming to realize the impact of her words for the first time. I just wanted to seem open-minded, you know? I wasn't serious. It was just a comment, Michael." "A comment?" He shook his head, incredulous. "Laura, comments like that destroy relationships. You didn't even realize what you were doing, did you? Or did you?" She tried to come closer, but he moved away. He needed space, needed time to understand how a trip that had seemed perfect had turned into a nightmare. Laura stood at the door for a few seconds, then left without saying another word, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. The cabin, which had once felt cozy, now felt suffocating. Michael looked again at the mountains, but all he could see was the uncertainty hanging over his marriage. And for the first time on that trip, he wondered if he really knew the woman he was married to. Morning came with a dense fog covering the mountains. The cabin's silence was broken only by distant bird song and the soft crackle of the last embers in the fireplace from the night before. Michael woke up early but stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling. The conversation from the previous night kept echoing in his mind. He felt as though the weight of those exchanged words had slept beside him, suffocating him through the night. The smell of coffee from the kitchen finally made him get up. He went downstairs slowly, the stairs creaking the only sound accompanying his steps. In the kitchen, David was sitting at the table, looking as uncomfortable as Michael felt. Emily was at the stove, stirring something in a pot, humming softly as if nothing had happened. Laura was perched on the counter with a cup of coffee in her hands, avoiding Michael's gaze. "Good morning," David said cautiously as Michael sat down beside him. Michael responded with a brief nod and began making his coffee, feeling Laura's eyes on his back, though she said nothing. The silence between them was so heavy it seemed to fill the room. Finally, Emily broke the tension, turning to face them with a spoon in hand. Well, the plan for today is to explore some of the trails around the cabin. What do you think? She smiled, completely ignoring what had happened the night before. I'll pass, Michael said dryly, without even looking up from his cup. David glanced at Emily, clearly bothered by the discomfort that filled the table. Later, when Emily and Laura decided to go for a walk by themselves, Michael saw his chance. He asked David to join him for a short walk, claiming he needed some fresh air. The two headed into the nearby woods, walking side by side in silence for a few minutes before Michael finally spoke up. I just can't understand what happened last night. He began, kicking a rock on the path. How can a trip meant to be peaceful and relaxing turn into this mess? David sighed. I didn't expect that either, man. When Emily said it, I thought it was just another one of her jokes. But Laura's reaction, well, it was unexpected. I don't even know what to tell you. Me neither, Michael replied, stopping and placing his hands on his hips. She's not like that. At least, not the Laura I know. Or thought I knew. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. It's like suddenly she's someone else. And it makes me question everything. What else don't I know about her? David remained silent for a moment before placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. Look, we all make mistakes, man. Maybe she was just trying to, I don't know, impress someone or fit in. But you have to decide what this means for you and for your marriage. Michael looked at David, surprised by the unexpected wisdom. He wanted to believe Laura hadn't been serious, that it was a moment of weakness or a misguided attempt to seem casual. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the feeling of betrayal weighing on his chest. As the two friends kept walking, Michael realized that no matter how much he talked to David or anyone else, the answer to his questions would have to come from Laura. The problem was he didn't know if he was ready to hear it. When they returned to the cabin, Michael found Laura sitting on the sofa, idly fiddling with a throw blanket. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away. The tension between them was palpable, but no one knew how to break the ice. Emily, who had returned from the walk with Laura, seemed determined to ignore any heavy mood, talking excitedly about the wood's beauty. David tried to match his wife's energy, but Michael and Laura were stuck in their own silence, their minds occupied by thoughts no one else could reach. That day, the cabin's atmosphere felt too tight, as if the walls were closing in around them. Michael knew the conversation he needed to have with Laura couldn't wait much longer. But the more he thought about it, the more he feared what he would hear from her. Night fell with a sharper chill. The fireplace was lit, but for Michael, its warmth didn't reach the distance he felt between himself and Laura. While David and Emily turned in early, perhaps to give the couple the space they needed, Michael remained seated on the couch. He stared into the fire, but didn't really see the flames. His mind was caught in a storm of thoughts and doubts. Laura, seated in the armchair beside him, looked equally uncomfortable. The silence between them was almost tangible, like an invisible yet impenetrable barrier. Finally, Laura broke the silence. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Michael, we need to talk. He didn't respond right away, but his eyes turned to her, filled with a mix of pain and expectation he'd been holding back since the night before. Laura took a deep breath, visibly nervous. I know what happened last night was wrong. I don't even know why I reacted that way. She lowered her head, gripping the blanket with both hands. When Emily said that, I wanted to seem easygoing, you know? Like I'm the kind of person who's always open to new ideas, someone interesting, someone who's not afraid to be daring. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was firm but not aggressive. And why would you feel the need to look like something you're not? Laura, I've known you for years. You never had to prove anything to anyone. That's exactly it. She answered quickly, looking up at him, tears in her eyes. I felt out of place, Michael. I see how Emily is confident, how she takes charge of the room, how she makes people laugh. I wanted to be like that, if only for a moment. But in trying to do that, I hurt you. I hurt us. He stayed quiet, absorbing her words. There was something in her confession that struck him deeply. He hadn't expected to hear that Laura's reaction that night had more to do with internal insecurities than any real desire to explore Emily's outrageous suggestion. Laura. Michael began, but his voice faltered. He took a deep breath and tried again. Do you really think you need to be like Emily to be interesting? I fell in love with you for who you are, not who you think you should be. Tears finally escaped Laura's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away with her sleeve. I know. But sometimes, it feels like I've lost a piece of myself, like I don't know what it means to be me anymore. And in trying to get that back, I did something so stupid, so unforgivable. Michael felt the knot in his chest tighten. He wanted to shout that it wasn't unforgivable, but the words wouldn't come out. The pain was still there, raw and throbbing, but he could see the sincerity in Laura's eyes. She wasn't trying to justify or downplay what had happened. She was genuinely exposing her feelings. I don't know how to fix this, Laura continued, her voice breaking. But I want to. I want us to go back to who we were before this trip. Before all of this. Michael stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the darkness. He didn't know exactly what to say or how to say it. Part of him still felt betrayed by Laura's reaction, but another part recognized her vulnerability and the courage it took to admit how she felt. He stood there for a long moment before finally speaking. Laura, trust is complicated. When it's broken, you can't just pick up the pieces and glue them back together. But that doesn't mean it's not worth trying. He turned to face her. I want to try. For us. Her eyes lit up, but he raised his hand, asking her to let him finish. But we need honesty. Truth. Because without that, we'll never be able to rebuild what we had. Laura nodded vigorously, wiping her face again. You're right. I promise, Michael. I promise to be honest, with myself and with you. And I'll never let something like that happen again. Michael returned to the sofa, sitting next to her. For a moment, they remained silent, just breathing the same air and sharing the same pain. But somehow, that silence didn't feel as heavy as before. It was as if, for the first time since the previous night, they had found a small spark of hope. The fire in the fireplace began to die down, but neither of them seemed to notice. They stayed there, side by side, determined to face the challenges ahead. The journey toward healing would be long, but that night, both were willing to take the first step. The weeks following the trip were marked by a quiet, steady effort from Michael and Laura to rebuild what had been shaken. The cabin, with all its natural beauty, was left behind, but the weight of their conversations and the tension of those days still lingered over them. Laura devoted herself to showing Michael that she was committed to restoring their trust. Small gestures, leaving affectionate notes on his desk, planning evenings out for just the two of them, became frequent. Michael, in turn, struggled against his own insecurities, trying to believe that Laura's remorse was genuine. David and Emily, however, had taken a different path. Michael hadn't heard from the couple since the trip, until one day David called. His voice was tense, different from the easygoing tone Michael was used to. Michael, we need to talk. Do you have a minute? David said without preamble. Sure, David. What's going on? Michael replied, already sensing something was wrong. David paused before continuing. I found out that Emily, well, she's been cheating on me. For a while, from what I gather. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was there. Confronting her felt like reliving that night at the cabin, but this time there were no excuses or attempts to soften the blow. She just confessed. Michael felt a knot in his stomach. He had always seen David and Emily as a solid couple, despite Emily's extravagances. David, I'm sorry. That's awful. How are you handling it? We're getting divorced, David said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I can't look at her the same way anymore. Everything that happened on that trip now makes more sense. Emily never wanted some absurd partner swap. She was testing limits, playing with our relationships. Honestly, I don't know how I got this far without noticing. Michael remained silent for a moment, absorbing what David had shared. The revelation brought back the memory of Emily's proposal at the cabin and Laura's reaction. He felt a mix of relief and discomfort, but above all, a recognition that things could have gone very differently for him and Laura. When he hung up the phone, Michael went straight to find Laura, who was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She noticed his serious expression immediately, and set down the knife she was holding. "What happened?" she asked, concerned. Michael crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "David just called. He and Emily are getting divorced." Laura's eyes widened. "What? Why?" "She had a lover. David found out everything. The separation was inevitable." Michael paused, watching Laura's reaction. She seemed genuinely shocked and saddened by the news. After a few seconds of silence, he continued, his voice firmer now. "See, Laura? What were we almost dragged into? That night, when you even remotely considered Emily's idea, this was what was at stake, not just our relationship, but who we are as people." Laura lowered her eyes, clearly affected by Michael's words. She took a deep breath before responding, her voice filled with emotion. "I know, Michael. I know what happened that night was a mistake. But I promise you, I will never let something like that put us at risk again. I'm not Emily, and you'll never be David. We're different. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you, if I have to." Michael walked up to her and took her hands. There was something different in her eyes, a sincerity he hadn't seen since before the trip. He knew the rebuilding process was slow and painful, but in that moment, something inside him softened. He could see in Laura a genuine desire to mend what had been broken. "I believe you, Laura," he said at last. "But we have to remember that trust is something we build together, every day." She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, Michael felt they were truly in sync. While dinner cooked in the oven, they sat together on the couch, silent but connected, ready to face the future on a stronger foundation, and above all, committed to never letting anything come between them again.
How do you feel about the OP story? We appreciate you joining us for yet another compelling story where justice is the main focus. So that you don't miss our next story, remember to subscribe. Everyone deserves honesty and loyalty in their relationships. Stay tuned for more captivating stories, but keep in mind that viewers should exercise caution as these stories may include mature subjects.